The millionaire was alone at the blind date until a little black boy walked in and said, "My dad will be here soon. Ma'am, are you sure you don't want to sit at a more private table?" The matrai at Le Bernardin whispered to Victoria Chun as he glanced nervously at the table next to them, where a couple clearly disapproved of the presence of a black child of about 5 who had just walked into Manhattan's most exclusive establishment alone. Victoria, 42, had built a technology empire valued at $800 million. But for the past 3 years, she had devoted so much time to her business that her personal life was non-existent. When her best friend insisted she accept a blind date with an amazing man, a single father, Victoria imagined anything but that. The little boy walked straight up to her table with the confidence of someone on an important mission. His worn sneakers contrasted with the surroundings where an appetizer cost more than the minimum wage, but his eyes sparkled with an intelligence that made Victoria smile immediately. "Excuse me, pretty lady," the boy said politely. "My dad asked me to let you know he's on his way. The traffic was really bad, and he didn't want you to think he forgot." "How did you recognize me?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. "He showed me your picture on his phone and said you'd be at the table by the window, smiling, even though you were nervous." The boy replied with a shy smile, and he said, "You're the smartest woman he's ever met." The murmuring at the neighboring tables grew louder. Victoria caught fragments of conversations. "What kind of father brings a child here? He probably can't even afford to be in this place. She should be more careful about who she agrees to meet." "And what's your name?" Victoria asked completely. Ignoring the whispers around her, Marcus said, the boy sitting down in the chair across from her as if it were the most natural place in the world. Dad said, "I could order a juice while we wait for him to arrive, but only if it's not too expensive." Victoria felt something familiar ignite inside her. The same quiet indignation she felt when investors doubted her abilities decades ago when she was just a young Asian woman trying to get funding in Silicon Valley. The difference was that now she had the power to do something about it. "Marcus," she said, signaling to the waiter, "how about we order the best juice they have here, and maybe some desserts, while we wait for your father?" The restaurant manager approached the table, clearly uncomfortable. "Ms. Chun, perhaps it would be better if the child waited in the lobby until his guardian arrives." Victoria slowly raised her eyes, and anyone who knew her from business would recognize that icy stare that preceded decisions that changed corporate destinies. "I'm sorry. I don't understand," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Are you suggesting that my little guest shouldn't be sitting with me?" The silence that followed was as heavy as it was revealing. Victoria watched every face around her, memorizing every expression of discomfort and prejudice disguised as concern for the environment. What no one there knew was that Victoria Chun had not become one of the most powerful women in the country by accepting injustice in silence, and what they were about to discover was that underestimating someone based on appearances was the first mistake in a series that would change their lives forever. If you're enjoying this story of how a blind date can reveal more about people than any resume, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how this seemingly simple evening would turn into a lesson no one would ever forget. Minutes later, a black man in his mid-30s entered the restaurant, clearly looking for someone. He was wearing a simple but well-kept suit, and his eyes scanned the room until he found Marcus waving excitedly from Victoria's table. "Dad!" Marcus shouted, causing several heads to turn in disapproval. The man walked over to the table, and Victoria immediately noticed how the restaurant staff watched him with thinly veiled suspicion. The same maître who had suggested a more private table now followed his every move with watchful eyes. "David Johnson," he said, extending his hand to Victoria with a genuine smile. "I'm sorry I'm late, and thank you so much for taking care of Marcus." "Victoria Chun," she replied, shaking his hand. "Marcus is lovely. We were just getting to know each other." David sat down, and Victoria noticed how his posture suddenly changed as he caught the glances around him. It was the behavior of someone accustomed to being judged before he even opened his mouth. "Daddy works at the hospital," Marcus announced proudly. "He saves people." "Marcus," David said softly, but Victoria interrupted him. "What kind of work do you do at the hospital?" "David, I'm a nurse in the ICU at Presbyterian," he replied, hesitating as if expecting the judgment that invariably came with that information. "Night shift. Mostly." Victoria saw the woman at the next table whisper something to her husband, who shook his head with an expression she knew well. It was the same look she had received years ago when young businessmen assumed she was a secretary during meetings in Silicon Valley. "And how did you two meet? Did my friend introduce you?" Victoria asked. "Sarah helped me when Marcus was hospitalized for 3 days last year," David explained, his voice carrying a paternal concern that made Victoria's heart ache. "Pneumonia. Sarah is the head nurse in pediatrics. She said she knew someone special who also worked too hard and forgot to live life." Marcus was quietly coloring on the children's menu, oblivious to the social dynamics around him when the restaurant manager approached them again. "Sir," he said to David with a forced smile, "I'd like to check your credit card before we continue with service. It's house policy for new customers." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt the familiar anger rise in her throat, the same anger she felt when investors asked if she really understood technology or if she was just the pretty face of the company. David calmly took out his wallet, but Victoria raised her hand. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I'll take care of the bill, Miss Chun." "You didn't have to," David began. But Victoria cut him off with a look that said this wasn't about money. "Marcus," she said, turning to the boy, "how about we tell your dad about the desserts we ordered?" While Marcus chattered on about the chocolate ice cream he had chosen, Victoria watched every movement around her. The couple at the next table who whispered constantly, the maîtresse who came by 3 times to make sure everything was okay. Something that never happened when she dined alone there. The waiter who took his time writing down David's order. But what caught her attention most was David, the way he responded to every microaggression with a patience that spoke of years of experience, how he protected Marcus from the malicious remarks by redirecting his attention, how he maintained his dignity while navigating a clearly hostile environment. "Do you do this often?" Victoria asked softly. "Meetings in places like this?" David smiled. "Riley, not exactly," Sarah insisted. "She said you were different and that this place was important to demonstrate seriousness. I would have preferred somewhere more welcoming." "And what would you do?" Victoria asked, watching the maître cast another disapproving glance. "If you could change that, if you could make places like this truly welcoming to everyone." David studied her for a moment, realizing there was more behind the question. "I believe real change comes from the inside out," he said carefully. "People with power need to use that power responsibly. It's not enough to be successful if you're not making the path easier for those who come after you." Victoria smiled genuinely for the first time that night. It was exactly the answer she expected from someone Sarah had described as special. What David didn't know was that he was dining with one of the most powerful people in New York. What the people around them didn't know was that every prejudiced whisper was being mentally catalogued by someone who had turned obstacles into multi-million-dollar business opportunities. And what no one in that restaurant could have imagined was that this seemingly simple evening was about to become a watershed moment that would prove that underestimating people based on appearances is the first mistake in a series that can cost much more than a simple dinner. For a moment, when Victoria watched David patiently explain to Marcus why some people look at them differently, everyone thought they were witnessing just another awkward scene in an elitist environment. But those who know true power know that it grows precisely in silent observation, waiting for the perfect moment to rewrite the rules of the game. Dinner continued, but Victoria noticed that David and Marcus' every move was scrutinized as if they were in a zoo. The waiter forgot to bring the bread that automatically accompanied other tables. The sommelier passed by 3 times, offering expensive wines to other people, but completely ignored David when he politely asked about the options. "Daddy," Marcus whispered, "why is that lady taking pictures of us?" Victoria followed the boy's gaze and saw a woman at the table diagonally across from them, discreetly pointing her cell phone in their direction. When she realized she had been caught, the woman quickly hid the device. "Some people don't know how to behave in public, Marcus," David replied calmly. But Victoria noticed the tension in his jaw. "Can I go to the bathroom, Dad?" "Sure, son. Do you want me to go with you?" "No need. I know where it is," Marcus said, sliding out of his chair. Victoria watched the boy walk through the restaurant with the same confidence as before, but now she noticed how every employee followed him with their eyes as if they expected him to break something or cause trouble. "David," she said, leaning slightly, "can I ask you a personal question? Of course, does this happen all the time? This constant surveillance?" David smiled with a bitterness that spoke of years of experience. Do you really want to know? I do. Yesterday, I went to the supermarket with Marcus after my shift. The security guard followed us down 6 aisles. When we stopped to choose cereal, he pretended to organize the shelves right next to us last week. I took Marcus to the park, and a mother asked if I was the babysitter and where his real mother was. Victoria felt something familiar ignite inside her. The same indignation she felt when investors asked if she had really developed her company's algorithms, or if she had male technical help. And you never react to what? David asked to confirm all the stereotypes they already have in their heads. So Marcus grows up thinking that confrontation is the answer to everything. At that moment, Marcus returned, but his face was different. Tears welled up in his eyes, which he bravely tried to hold back. "What happened, son?" David asked immediately, pulling the boy close. The man in the bathroom said, "I shouldn't be here," Marcus whispered. He said, "Places like this aren't for people like us." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt her anger turn into something much more dangerous. Icy determination, David held his son's face in both hands. "Marcus, listen to Daddy. You have the right to be anywhere that treats you with respect, and anywhere that doesn't is not worthy of you." "But why did he say that, Daddy?" "Because some people are afraid of things they don't understand. But that's their problem, not ours." Victoria discreetly took out her cell phone and sent a quick message. "James, I need you to come to Le Bernardine now. Bring all the company documentation and call Amanda. We'll need her too." David noticed the movement. "Is everything okay?" "Perfectly fine," Victoria replied. But there was something in her voice that made David pay attention. "David, may I ask, do you know about my business? Sarah mentioned that you work in technology. Why?" Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the same smile she used before announcing acquisitions that changed entire markets. Professional curiosity. 15 minutes later, a man in an impeccable suit entered the restaurant. Tall, black, carrying a leather briefcase and exuding authority. The maître practically ran to greet him. "I'm here to meet Miss Chun," James said, and Victoria nodded discreetly. The man walked over to the table, and Victoria noticed how the entire dynamic of the restaurant changed instantly. Conversation stopped, waiters stood up straight. The manager appeared out of nowhere. "James," Victoria said calmly, "I'd like you to meet David and Marcus." "David, this is James Morrison, my general counsel." David's expression changed slightly. General counsel of a technology company was no minor position. "Pleased to meet you," James said, shaking David's hand. "And this must be the famous Marcus." He crouched down to the boy's height. "Your mother told me you're very brave, James," Victoria said, her voice taking on a tone David hadn't heard before. "I need you to write something down for me." She began to recount with surgical precision every incident she had witnessed in the last 2 hours. The request to check the credit card, the most private table, the looks, the constant surveillance, the incident in the bathroom. James took notes on a tablet, nodding occasionally. "Understood," he said when Victoria finished. "What about the other issues we discussed?" "Proceed as planned." David watched this interaction with growing curiosity. There was something going on that he didn't fully understand. "Victoria," he said carefully, "may I ask what exactly your job is?" Victoria looked at him, then at Marcus, who was coloring quietly, oblivious to the undercurrents of power beginning to move around the table. "I solve problems," she said simply. "Systemic problems that affect people who deserve better." At that moment, the manager approached again, but now with a difference that had not been there before. "Miss Chun, is there anything we can do to improve your experience?" Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Actually, there is. But first, I need to clarify something. Do you know my company?" "Your company?" "Chen Technologies. You may have heard of it." The manager's face drained of color. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Victoria said calmly. "And you know why? Because you were too busy making assumptions based on appearances to care who was dining at your restaurant." David began to understand. The woman sitting across from him wasn't just rich. She was powerful, very powerful, James, Victoria continued. "What kind of properties is our company looking for to expand our culinary training program?" "Established restaurants in downtown Manhattan," James replied without hesitation. "Preferably with a good location and potential for management change." The manager looked like he was about to faint. "Interesting," Victoria murmured, looking around the establishment as if evaluating it for the first time. This place has potential. What the manager didn't know was that Victoria Chun had built an empire not just by selling technology, but by transforming companies that underestimated talented people. What David was beginning to realize was that his seemingly simple evening had turned into something much bigger, and what Marcus, in his childlike innocence, had unwittingly done was introduce a force of entrepreneurial nature to the injustice he and his father faced on a daily basis. A force that did not tolerate discrimination in any form? For a moment, when Victoria smiled sweetly at the sweating manager, everyone in the restaurant thought they were witnessing just another satisfied customer. But those who understand true power know that it manifests itself first in silent observation, then in meticulous preparation before completely rewriting the rules of the game. "James," Victoria said calmly, still watching the visibly sweating manager, "can you explain to me the details of the corporate diversity program we implemented last year?" "Certainly," James replied, opening his tablet. "We established partnerships with establishments to promote inclusion, offering free consulting, investments in training, and in exceptional cases, complete acquisition when we detected systematic discriminatory practices." David watched the conversation with growing fascination, beginning to understand that he was witnessing something much bigger than a simple dinner. "And what was the financial outcome of these interventions?" Victoria asked as if she were in a board meeting. "The establishments that voluntarily joined saw profits increase by an average of 340%. Those that resisted, well, they prefer not to comment publicly on the results." At that moment, Victoria's cell phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Not a kind smile. Perfect. Amanda got the information we needed. She turned to the manager, who was standing there like a statue. "Sir, sorry, I didn't catch your name." Robert Mitchell," he stammered. "Mr. Mitchell. Do you know how many complaints of racial discrimination this establishment has received in the last 2 years?" The silence was deafening, Victoria continued, reading from her cell phone. 17 families who reported differential treatment based on skin color. "All quietly filed away by management," James typed quickly. "And the employees fired for disciplinary reasons during the same period." Interestingly, 87% were Black or Latino employees who had reported discriminatory practices internally. David felt Marcus moved closer to him, realizing that something important was happening. "Dad, is she helping us?" Marcus whispered. "I think so, son." Victoria rose gracefully, and the entire dynamic of the restaurant changed instantly. Conversation stopped. Waiters gathered nervously. The maître disappeared completely. "Mr. Mitchell," she said in the same voice she had used to fire incompetent CEOs, "I would like you to know that my company owns 23% of the shares in the hotel group that controls this restaurant." The manager's face turned gray, "and that our influence in the Manhattan real estate market allows us to, let's say, significantly influence which establishments thrive and which face unexpected difficulties." James added softly, "Licenses, certifications, health inspections, online reviews. There are many variables that affect a restaurant's success. But I don't believe in punishment without opportunity for redemption." Victoria continued, "So, I'm going to make you an offer." She sat down again, and Marcus returned to his seat, watching everything with wide eyes. "Within 48 hours, you will implement an anti-discrimination training program for the entire staff. Within a week, you will hire a diversity director. Within a month, you will establish a transparent reporting system with external oversight." "And if I refuse?" the manager asked, his voice barely a whisper. Victoria smiled sweetly. "Then in 72 hours, you'll find out what happens when Chen Technologies decides that an establishment is not aligned with our corporate values." At that moment, her phone rang. She answered it without taking her eyes off the manager. "Amanda, perfect. Yes. You can publish the full report on discriminatory practices at elite Manhattan restaurants. Give special attention to Lou Bernardine with photos, dates, and testimonials." The manager turned completely pale. "Oh, and Amanda, send copies to the Times, Post, Village, and all influential food blogs. Be sure to mention that this will be our case study to demonstrate why the hospitality industry needs urgent change." She hung up and looked calmly at the manager, who looked like he was about to faint. "Of course," she said casually, "I can cancel the publication if we see real and immediate change." David realized he was witnessing a masterclass in power being wielded with surgical precision. Victoria wasn't just getting revenge. She was rewriting the rules of the game. "Mr. Mitchell," she continued, "what happened today to my friend David and Marcus is a microcosm of a systemic problem. You can choose to be part of the solution or become a public example of what we no longer tolerate." The manager swallowed hard. "What? What do you need me to do?" "First, you will personally apologize to each employee who was unfairly dismissed. Second, you will offer reinstatement with compensation. Third, you will implement the changes I mentioned," James added, "and you will document the entire process, which will be audited quarterly by our social responsibility team." "And if you do all that," Victoria concluded, "not only will we keep this incident private, but we will include Lou Bernardine in our preferred partner program. which means about 2 million in annual corporate events. The manager nodded desperately. Yes, ma'am. Everything will be done exactly as you specified. Victoria turned to David, who was watching her with a mixture of admiration and amazement. David, she said softly, may I make a confession? Of course, when I saw how you protected Marcus tonight, how you maintained your dignity in the face of every microaggression, I realized something. You have exactly the kind of character I admire, the kind of person I want by my side. Marcus clapped his hands. Does that mean you two are getting married? Victoria laughed genuinely for the first time that evening. It means I'd love to have more dinners with you two in places that treat us with the respect we deserve. As the entire restaurant watched in absolute silence, Victoria Chun had turned a night of discrimination disguised as elegance into a lesson on how true power manifests itself. Not through shouting or confrontation, but through the ability to completely rewrite the rules of the game. For a moment, as the manager rushed to implement his first changes, and the waiters began treating David and Marcus with a difference they had never experienced before, everyone realized they had witnessed something rare. Justice being served in real time by someone who had turned personal injustices into systemic power to protect others. But the real revolution was yet to come, because Victoria Chun wasn't just interested in changing one restaurant. She was about to use this evening as a catalyst to transform an entire industry that had operated for decades with unwritten codes of exclusion and privilege. 6 months later, Hideen was no longer the same establishment. The gold plaque at the entrance now included the SEAL-certified diversity partner Chen Technologies, and the difference was visible from the moment you stepped inside. David walked through the restaurant with Marcus, watching as the new staff, now 60% minority employees, greeted each customer with the same genuine respect. Mr. Mitchell had been transferred to new opportunities after 3 weeks of intensive training, replaced by a Latina manager who completely transformed the atmosphere. Dad, is Ms. Victoria going to have dinner with us again? Marcus asked, adjusting his little tie, a gift from Victoria for his important meetings every Friday. Son, as promised, their table was now always the same. The best view with a special menu that Marcus had helped create. Not because Victoria had bought special treatment, but because they had become part of a chosen family that grew with each meeting. Victoria arrived on time, but now she was not alone. James accompanied her along with Amanda, her communications director, and Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation, the new director of corporate diversity who had implemented the Marcus program, an initiative that had already transformed 47 establishments in New York. How was the CNN interview today? David asked, kissing Victoria on the cheek, a ritual that had developed naturally over the months. Perfect. Our model for corporate intervention against discrimination has already been adopted by 12 large corporations. The Lou Bernardine case has become a Harvard case study. Marcus clapped his hands. Does that mean more places will be cool like here? Exactly, little one. It means that other kids like you won't have to go through what we went through that first night. David watched Victoria interact with Marcus, patiently explaining how companies can use resources to create positive change. She had become not only his partner, but also Marcus's mentor, who now at the age of 6 was already talking about social justice with the seriousness of an academic. Can I tell you something? David said, holding Victoria's hand. That terrible night was the best thing that ever happened to us. How so? Because it showed me that there are people willing to use their power to protect those who have no voice. And because it brought you into our lives, their relationship blossomed organically, built on shared values and mutual admiration. Victoria discovered that financial success was empty without purpose, while David found a partner who not only accepted his dedication to his son, but celebrated it. The transformation went beyond the personal. Chen Technologies launched the Marcus Johnson Fund, a $50 million program to combat discrimination in commercial establishments. David became its official spokesperson, using his experience as a nurse and single father to humanize complex social issues. You know what makes me most proud? Victoria said, watching Marcus color quietly. It's not that we changed a restaurant. It's knowing that Marcus will grow up in a world where his presence anywhere will be celebrated, not questioned. James laughed. And to think it all started because you agreed to a blind date. Actually, Marcus interrupted, looking up from his drawing, it started because I was brave and talked to the pretty lady. Even though I didn't know her, everyone laughed. But Victoria crouched down to his height. Marcus, you're right. Your courage that night changed much more than just a dinner. It changed how companies think about fairness. The restaurant around them buzzed with positive energy. Diverse families dined peacefully. Employees worked with dignity. And an environment that once excluded now welcomed. It was the tangible result of when people with power decide to use that power responsibly. David looked around, remembering that first night. You know what I learned? The best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful that it makes injustice impossible to repeat. Victoria smiled as she watched Marcus show her his drawing. A family of 3 holding hands in front of a building with a sign that read, "All are welcome, Marcus," she said. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be like you and Dad," he replied seriously. "I want to help families be happy everywhere." At that moment, surrounded by people she loved and witnessing the positive impact of her actions, Victoria realized she had found something more valuable than any business success: purpose that transcends profit. The story of one night of discrimination had turned into a quiet revolution, proving that when the right people come together in the right circumstances, they can rewrite the rules of how the world works. If this story of how a blind date turned into a lesson about justice, power, and social responsibility touched your heart, subscribe to the channel,